Welcome back to A Choice Homestead, where on my channel I focus on food, growing it, preparing it, and preserving it. Today is going to be a preservation day. I am finally getting to my cherries. These are the ones I just picked up in my Azure order, and I'm gonna get them into jars as a cherry pie filling. We don't eat a lot of pie in this house, but it is nice to have that on the pantry shelf. If we have guests, it's an easy pie to throw together. I can also make cherry pie egg rolls out of them. I have a video where I did apple pie egg rolls. Those are always a massive hit, and it's just a small dessert. It's not a huge pie or a large slice of pie. I prefer that, or even a hand pie. We do a lot of hand pies here too when we do use pie filling. There is a trick with cherry pie and apple pie because we're gonna be using clear gel, which is a modified cornstarch. That is going to be the thickening agent in here. If you use regular cornstarch, you're going to be very disappointed with the results because this is going to be heating up in the canner as we do a water bath can process on it. And cornstarch doesn't really heat up well the second time, so you're going to lose that thick consistency when you bake your pie. It's just going to kind of run everywhere. Clear gel is the thickening agent that you want to use. I'm going to be using a recipe from the USDA Complete Guide to Home Canning. You can find the same recipe on the National Center for Home Food Preservation. You don't need to have this book to follow along. Literally, the recipe is the same. I'm going to be going for 7 quarts because that's what my Presto pressure canner holds. This is a water bath canning recipe, but I only have pressure canners because you can water bath can in pressure canners, but you can't pressure can in water bath canners. I like the twofers, so I have the pressure canner. So I can hold 7 quarts. For 7 quarts of cherry pie filling, I am going to need 6 quarts of cherries, and there are 4 quarts to a cup, so I'm gonna need 24 cups of cherries. These come frozen. My box is a little mangled here because I had them outside in the freezing snow and then brought them in this morning just to get the defrost process started. I need to get them fully defrosted, and then we're gonna measure out the 24 cups. Let them defrost the rest of the way in a colander over a bowl so I can catch the juice that comes off of them, because this recipe does require water, but if you want a better tasting end product, you should use the juice that comes off the cherry. So for example, if I get a cup of juice, I'll replace 1 cup of the water with that cup of juice. I'm gonna go ahead and get this box opened first, and we'll measure out just what we need. These are the Montgomery tart cherries, which are the recommended type to make a cherry pie filling with, not the sweet cherries. We already have quite a bit of juice, which is good. I will pour that into my bowl first. That was about 2 cups already. So here's 4. Eight. And I can pour these straight into a bowl. Two and a half cups. The cherries that I bought back in November, I freeze-dried some of them and I put the rest in the freezer intending to can them, but didn't get around to it. So whatever's left in here, I'll add those to the ones that I still have in the freezer, and I'm gonna freeze dry those because these come out amazing freeze-dried. So there's 12 cups. $16 cups. I'm gonna let these strain the rest of the way, and then we're gonna get started. For 7 quarts of finished cherry pie filling, we want to use 6 quarts of cherries. The cherries can be frozen defrosted. They can also be fresh. This is 5 quarts that I've already measured out, and how I'm doing that is I'm just using a quart-sized jar and loading the drained cherries into the jar. And with the cherry pie filling, just like with apple pie filling, it says an inch headspace. You actually want more like 1.5 to 2 inches because of the clear gel. The clear gel tends to bubble up and you can siphon. So I'm not filling these all the way up as I'm measuring because we definitely want that extra headspace. So here is 6 quarts of cherries. Now let's get our jars prepped. First thing you want to do when canning is to make sure that your canner and your jars are ready. This is my Presto pressure canner, but I'm going to just use it for water bath canning. I do have one rack on the bottom. That's important. You don't want your jars sitting on the bottom of a pot that you plan on canning in without something separating it from the heating element and the bottom of the pan, because the heat could crack your jars. It could cause your jars to tumble over. So you need some degree of separation. If you don't have a canning rack, if you found your canner at a Goodwill, or if you were gifted it and it didn't come with the rack, you can use canning bands. So if I did not have a rack on the bottom, I could just put these in to fill up the space and then sit my jars right on top. Let me show you. With the rings on the bottom, I could take a jar and I could set it between 2 rings. It's very stable and it's going to stay off of the heat element. So if you don't have a rack, you can use the canning bands. Now I do have a rack, so I'm going to take those bands back out. But that is probably the easiest thing to do. You could also lay a towel down. I've done that before just to test it out. And while it does work, I think one of my jars did fall over because towels aren't cut to the exact shape of the bottom of your pot. So you have to kind of fold them over, which can make them just a little unstable. So I think these are the way to go if you don't have a rack. We know that this is going to be a hot pack because we have to heat up the cherry pie filling before putting it into jars. Anytime we're heating up the contents that are going into the jar, it's a hot pack, which means you want the food going into the jar hot, you want the jar hot, and you want the canner hot. So we have to get the canner warmed up, and we also have to get our jars warmed up. I have 7 quart-sized jars here filled with warm water. They don't have lids on them. I'm just gonna set those into the bottom of the dry canner. Your jars have to be submerged 1 inch underwater to make sure that they maintain the temperature necessary to make this a safe product once you're done processing. So I'm just gonna pour in water until we have at least 1 inch over the top. And unfortunately, my debubbler headspace measuring tool has gone MIA, so I have marked a chopstick here. So the first line is 1 inch, the second line is 1.5 inches, and the third line is 2 inches. I marked it this way just for this application. So if I put the end of the chopstick onto the top of the jar, I want to be at least under that first ring, closer to the second ring though, because we're not accounting right now for the lids or the bands. So I'm going to add some more water. And now we are just to the top of that 1 inch mark, or I guess by the water mark, we're about halfway there. I'm going to add just a tiny bit more water and then this will be ready to go. That is 2 inches above the top of the jar. That to me is perfect. With our jars in the canner, I did want to mention that we don't have to sterilize them. We don't have to sterilize the jars, the lids, or the bands. That rule has changed. Anytime you're going to be processing something in boiling water for 10 minutes, it's going to self-sterilize. This processing time is 30 minutes, so these jars, the lids, and the bands will sterilize during the processing time, so we don't have to sterilize those. We need 6 quarts of cherries right here. We need 7 cups of sugar, and that really pains me. I might cut back on that just a little bit. You can reduce the sugar if you'd like. We need 1 3/4 cups of clear gel. So this is the thickening agent that's approved for canning pie filling. This is Hoosier Hill Farm brand, and I get this on Amazon. We need 9 1/3 cups of cold water. I did get 4 cups of juice when I strained the cherries, plus 1 more cup. So I have 4 cups of cherry juice, 4 cups of water, and then this is the 1 cup of cherry juice plus the 1/3 cup of water. So altogether 9 1/3 cup of water. Then we're also going to need a 1/2 cup of bottled lemon juice. Very important that you use bottled lemon juice. Use a name brand. It's the acidity that matters when canning to make things safe. So you definitely need to use bottled lemon juice. And then optionally, we can add cinnamon, almond extract, or red food coloring. I'm not going to opt for any of those, but you could. You could use a teaspoon of cinnamon, 2 teaspoons of almond extract, and a 1/4 teaspoon of red food coloring. Now, because we are using frozen cherries, we get to skip the first step. So this says rinse and pit the cherries, hold them in cold water, prevent the stem end from browning by using an ascorbic acid solution. See page 111. It will also reference it on the National Center for Home Food Preservation. For fresh fruit, we're gonna place 6 cups at a time into 1 gallon of boiling water, and we're gonna boil each batch for 1 minute. After the water returns to a boil, then drain them, but keep them covered so that they stay warm. And then we're gonna move on to combine the sugar and clear gel in a saucepan. We get to start right there because these are not fresh. So they've already been frozen and defrosted. They've kind of deflated already. We just need to make sure that we warm these up before they go into jars. So we will get there. We get to skip that first step, but then we do have to add a second step. So we're going to start with the combined sugar and clear gel and then mix in the water. That was 7 cups of sugar and 1 3/4 cups of clear gel. I'm gonna put the sugar and the clear gel together in the pan first and get those mixed together with no heat. I think I'm gonna do 6 cups of sugar. 7 just seems like an awful lot to me. So we're going with 6. And then 1 3/4 cups of the clear gel. I wish they made these with a better pour spout because this stuff gets everywhere. Remember, this is your thickening agent. If you think about eating an apple pie or a cherry pie or a peach pie, it's got that really dense, fruity filling that's not the fruit, that's in between the fruit, and that's what happens with the juice and then the clear gel. That's the end of this one. I do have a second one. And this is why we wear an apron in the kitchen. This stuff is just so messy. There's 1 cup. And then it wants 3/4 cup, so I'm gonna do 1/4 cup 3 times. And I'm just gonna use my little chopstick here to level that out. The consistency of this bothers me. It's like fingernails on a chalkboard. It gives me the spine shivers in its dry form. Once it's cooked, it's fine. I don't have any heat on. I am gonna just get the ingredients in here whisked together. I'm using the Danish dough whisk. I think that it works well to get everything nicely combined. You can see all the vapor coming up from that clear gel. Now we're going to stir in our liquids. I'll start with the water. So here is 4 cups of water. I want to make sure everything is well mixed. And I'm going to go ahead and turn the heat on now to a medium high. And here is 4 cups of the cherry juice. And that was the last bit of cherry juice water combo. Now we're just gonna keep stirring this. We're gonna stir this until it begins to boil and thicken. And as this is coming to a boil, heating up, we've got a good amount of steam coming off of this pot. There's bubbles all over the jars, so those are heating up nicely. What I also like about this whisk is it allows me to get right up against the edge where the sides of this pot meet the bottom to keep everything moving. So I'm just stirring this every minute or so. It's just starting to get warm. I don't have to worry about vigorously stirring this until it starts to get hot. You want to catch it though before it thickens. It has been about 5 minutes total so far. Starting to bubble around the edges. So now I'm gonna really pay attention and make sure that we're working that whisk through the liquid so we reduce the clumps. We want this to be smooth. And it should thicken up pretty quickly here now. 9 minutes total since we turned this burner on. And we were able to reduce the sugar because sugar doesn't have anything to do with the actual preservation of the product. It's really just to sweeten it up. I opted to reduce that. You can too. You could add more sugar if you were so inclined. The preservation safety comes from the acidity in the cherries as well as the added lemon juice. One of the reasons why people like to add the red food coloring is because you can see the color here. It's a light pink. When you eat cherry pie, you want it to be that vibrant red. I'm okay with whatever color this turns out, but if you choose to make it redder, you can do so. So I can feel a little bit of resistance in some spots, so we're definitely starting to thicken in some places. And the next 2 steps are gonna go pretty quick. So I'm gonna add the lemon juice as soon as this is thick all the way through. You'll see what that looks like as we do it. And then we need to continue boiling this for exactly 1 minute. As soon as that 1 minute is up, we can go ahead and add our cherries in. And that's the step that differs from if you were starting with fresh cherries that you boiled first. So if you started with fresh cherries that you boil first, you would just fold those in with the heat turned off. You're ready to load your jars. But because our cherries are cold, we need to heat them up until it starts to reboil, and then we can turn the heat off and start loading our jars. And I'm starting to feel resistance on the bottom here, everywhere. So it's not just pockets, it's thickening everywhere. So this shouldn't be too much longer. We are at 12 minutes. I'm feeling some drag on my tool on the bottom of the pan. You can probably see the darker colors in here. Those are the areas where it's thickening, and I think we just saw a bubble there from boiling. Yep, starting to boil. So this is gonna go pretty quick. It's getting really thick now. You see it's sticking to the whisk. Nice and thick. It's holding on a spoon. So that is perfect. I'm gonna add that lemon juice in, and we're gonna go for 60 seconds. And you wanna whisk that in really well and stir it continuously for the whole 60 seconds. Get it really well mixed in there. And just as a reminder, if you're starting with frozen cherries like me, you're not gonna turn your heat off at that 1 minute mark. Whereas if you were starting with fresh cherries that had already been boiled in step 1, you could turn your heat off after that 1 minute. There's my 1 minute timer, so I can go ahead and start to fold in cherries now. So I'm just gonna put some in and then stir it and repeat. The cold cherries are gonna cool this down. And even though I had those in the colander for quite a while, there was still some more juice that came out. That should be fine though. As soon as this comes back up to a boil, I can turn the heat off and we can start loading our jars. And then I will have 2 or 3 years worth of cherry pie filling on my pantry shelf. You can see that it's calmed down, it's no longer boiling, so once we see that boil, we can move on. I like to make sure that all of my filling is in the pot because it's so disappointing when you are short a smidge to make your headspace work. We are just about there. Smells really good. Smells like cherry pie. You can see that we are just about ready to burst with boiling. So close. I'm just going to make sure all of my filling is down where I need it as I'm filling the jars. And not up here on the sides of the pan where it's not going to do me any good. We are back up to a boil, so I'm going to go ahead and get this heat turned off and we can get canning. I just pulled a jar out of the canner. I'll show you that on the next one. And I'm just going to use a ladle and fill this up to somewhere between 1.5 inches and 2 inches of headspace, because we don't want this erupting like a volcano, spilling on the outside of our jars during or after the canning process. That would definitely interfere with a good seal and it would be a waste. I'm going to do 1 jar at a time, leaving the other jars inside the canner filled with water until we are ready to use them. And because I don't have my debubbler tool, this is very sticky. I'm going to use that chopstick. So I have lines painted on the narrow end as well as the wider end. The wider end is what I stuck down in here, but the wider end is also what I want to move this around to debubble it with. So I'm going to measure it using the small side. So 1 inch, we are well below that, and I am right at about 1.5 inches here, so that's perfect. Now I'm going to use the wider end of the chopstick, and I'm going to stir this up as best I can to just make sure there aren't any air pockets down there that would further adjust our headspace. Next, this is a very sticky pie filling, and I can see that I've gotten some on the rim of the jar. We need to make sure that the rim of the jar is very clean. So I have some white distilled vinegar in this container and a cloth napkin, and I'm just going to use that white distilled vinegar to wipe. I'm pressing down pretty hard the outside or the top edge of the jar. That's allowing me to feel for any possible nicks and cracks in the jar, and also to clean it so that that gummy ring around the outer edge of the canning lid can seal. So we center our lid on, and then we're going to put a band on. I always turn it counterclockwise until I hear it seat, and then I can push it forward with just fingers, no thumb, until it won't go anymore, and then give it a finger tight turn just until your fingers can't do the job on their own anymore and you would have to use your wrist. So that's finger tight, and then we can lift this into the canner and pull out our next jar. I'm pulling them straight out. I'm only tipping them a tiny bit just to get a little tiny bit of the water off the top so I don't spill it as I carry this to the sink and then empty it. So now we have a steamy hot jar, perfect for filling with hot pie filling. steamy hot food, steamy hot jar, and steamy hot water over here. I'm basically putting it in there until just touching the bottom of my funnel, and then I'll verify that headspace with my lines on my chopstick. We are just under 1.5 inches, so I can put a tiny bit more in there. Level that out. Give it a measure. Now we're at 1.5 inches. Now I'm gonna use the wider end of the chopstick and I'm gonna stir this up. So I'm good with that. And again, I'm gonna wipe that rim really well. Center a lid. Put on a band counterclockwise until it seats. Forward with just a finger and then finger tight. And then we can use our jar lifter, put it back in the canner. Using a napkin to help carry this also helps you tip it. You have a little bit more control over it in the sink when you tip it. If I get too much in the jar, I'm gonna use a spoon to take it out. I think that might have been too much. Yeah, we're just past the 1.5 inch mark, just over it, and I really don't wanna go above 1.5 inches. Or I should say less than 1.5 inches of headspace. There we go. Seven quarts of cherry pie filling ready to process. There isn't much left in there at all. I'll scrape that out, probably put that in the freezer. Maybe, I don't know, we'll do something with that. Maybe mix it in with some yogurt, something, so that won't go to waste. With our canner loaded, we're gonna go ahead and dump that vinegar in. I have hard water. Hard water, especially when you water bath can, has a tendency to leave a white film on the outside of your jars after they're done processing, and it's not pretty, it's hard to wash off. White distilled vinegar helps cut down on that. So I just pour whatever I have left in my container after I wipe the rims of the jars into the canner. Then we can get the lid on, and I'm just gonna leave it like that. If I was pressure canning, I would cinch the lid closed. Eventually I would put a cover on this steam spout here But this is water bath, so I'm just setting this on here, and when I notice some steam coming out of the vent pipe, I will check it, see if it's boiling. Once it's at a rolling boil, our processing time is 30 minutes. It's 30 minutes regardless if you're doing pint or quarts, which makes it easy to remember. I'll bring you back when it is at a rolling boil so you can see what that looks like, and that's when we'll start our timer. And since we do want these to boil, we're gonna make sure our heat is on high. Good to go. We've got steam, so I think we're there. I'm gonna open this lid away from me so I don't scald my face. And we are under a good rolling boil. So we can start our 30-minute timer. I'll see you back here then. Our 30-minute timer has just gone off. I'm gonna go ahead and shut the burner off. But I'm just gonna leave this. I'm gonna leave this for 10 minutes to let it cool down. I'm treating that clear gel in here just as I would if this was a product that I was pressure canning. This really needs to come down and acclimate slowly. So 10 minutes before we even crack the lid. Now that that 10 minutes is up, we can go ahead and crack the lid. And that's all I'm gonna do is just crack it, and we're gonna let that acclimate for 10 minutes. Then we can get the lid off, but we're still gonna let it sit in the canner for another 10 minutes before we get it out, so we've got 20 more minutes. That 10-minute time is up, so now we can go ahead and get this off, and hopefully we're not gonna see a whole lot of cherry pie filling in our water. This is always the moment of truth. Our water looks very clear, so I think we're good. But I'm gonna let these sit for 10 minutes before we get them out. It does look like a couple of the jars have pinged down, at least this one has. The others still have their buttons up, which is not uncommon because they're still hot. The jars seal as they cool. That's one of the reasons why we let them sit for 24 hours before we tip the jar at all. So 10 more minutes and we'll get these out and we'll be done. We've been at this for a total of 2 hours and 5 minutes now. This is not gonna take you that long. It takes me a little bit of extra time because I'm talking through the steps while I'm doing it, which just elongates the process. So even though this is only a 30-minute processing time, it's still gonna take you probably an hour and a half to get this done, but well worth it. We're at the time now where we can go ahead and get these out of the canner. I'm gonna put them on my counter on a towel. The reason for that is my counters are cold, the jars are hot. I don't wanna shock them. I don't want the jars to break or become weakened, so I'm gonna put them on a towel, and that's where they're gonna sit for 24 hours so we don't run the risk of losing a seal. And I'm just gonna take these out by lifting them straight out of the canner. There's water on top of the jar, which with my type A personality really bothers me. I want to tip the jar. I want to get the water off of the lid, but that is going to run the risk of having spillage onto the rim of the jar, and that is going to interfere with the seal. So we're just going to have to let that water dry on its own. It'll be fine. It will dry. So these are just going to go straight to the towel. Without tipping. That's the timer for our dinner. As you can see, the water is crystal clear. We definitely didn't siphon, which we know because there's also not cherry pie filling along the outside of the jar. Let's take a look at the jars. We started with 1.5 inches of headspace, so down here. So you can see how much this did come up with that clear gel in here, which is why you want to give yourself at least 1.5 inches of headspace. If I had done just 1 inch of headspace, likely the cherry pie filling would have erupted like a volcano, and I would have some pretty messy jars and probably some seals that wouldn't hold. These look great. Again, they're going to sit here for 24 hours before I wash them and get them put away. They look really good. You can find that recipe and other canning instructional recipes on the National Center for Home Food Preservation. There's also lots of Facebook groups for safe canning, tested recipe canning that you can check out if you're interested in canning. I can put my canning playlist up here if you're interested in seeing that. I try to be thorough on all of my how-to videos, especially when it comes to canning. Here is the book that I purchased. It's available online, but it just duplicates what you can find on the National Center for Home Food Preservation, and that website is going to to stay up to date versus this was printed and I'd have to get a reprint if I wanted a more up-to-date version. But it's still a good reference. Thank you so much for joining me for another edition of Sunday Fun Day, where we turned frozen cherries into delicious cherry pie filling. My name is Kelly, you're at A Better Choice Homestead, and I do hope you come back and visit again soon.